The realtor's voice carried through the living room like she owned the place. If we can just get the seller to sign the final papers, we'll hand over the keys this afternoon and you can start moving in next week. Her tone was bright, professional, absolutely certain this was a done deal. I stood frozen in the hallway of my childhood home, listening as complete strangers discussed my life in past tense. Talked about which walls they'd knock down, which rooms they'd repaint, how quickly they could gut the kitchen I'd eaten breakfast in for 18 years. My mother sat on the couch, Dad's old couch that she'd never liked but he'd refused to replace, nodding along with that practiced smile she used when she wanted people to think she was agreeable. The smile that meant she'd already made up her mind and was just waiting for everyone else to catch up. The house has been in the family for decades, the realtor continued, gesturing around the room like she was presenting a museum exhibit. But Mrs. Caldwell is ready to downsize, and this property is exactly what you've been looking for. Mrs. Caldwell, my mother, selling the house my father had left to both of us, without telling me, without asking, without apparently caring that I existed. That's when I stepped forward from the hallway where I'd been standing since I'd quietly let myself in through the back door, and said calmly, clearly, I already have the keys. The room froze. Every head turned toward me, and I watched my mother's practiced smile crack like thin ice. Her smile had been the first thing I'd noticed when I'd peered through the dining room window 10 minutes earlier. I'd driven 6 hours from the city after my neighbor Mrs. Chen, no, Mrs. Patterson, the woman who'd lived next door my whole life, had called to tell me there was a for sale sign in the front yard. I thought you should know, she said carefully, in case your mother forgot to mention it. My mother never forgot things like that. She just chose not to share them. So I canceled my afternoon meetings, gotten in my car, and driven straight here. Hadn't called ahead. Hadn't given warning. Had just come home to find strangers walking through my childhood, measuring windows and discussing renovations. And there was Mom, sitting on that couch with her perfect posture and her carefully maintained appearance, wearing the navy blue dress she saved for important occasions. The dress that meant this was serious. This was final. This was her taking control the way she always did when she decided something needed to happen. She'd been smiling at the potential buyers, a young couple who clearly had no idea they were walking into a family situation. Smiling like she had every right to sell this house. Like the property was entirely hers to dispose of. Like I didn't exist. Like my father's wishes didn't matter. That smile had told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't something we could discuss reasonably. This was a decision she'd made, and she'd kept it from me deliberately because she knew I'd object. Well, I was here now, and objecting wasn't going to be necessary. Because I had something better than objections. I had documentation. The line that broke me, the one that made me step forward instead of continuing to listen, came from my mother's own mouth. The realtor had asked if there were any potential complications with the sale, any family members who might contest the transaction. Oh, no, my mother had said with casual confidence. My daughter lives out of state. She's busy with her career in the city. She won't be a problem. She won't be a problem. Not she's aware of the sale or she's supportive or even we've discussed this. Just, she won't be a problem. Like I was an obstacle to be managed rather than a person with legal rights to the property. Like my entire relationship to this house, to my childhood, to my father's memory, could be dismissed as not a problem because I'd moved away and built a life somewhere else. I'd known my mother could be cold. Had spent 32 years watching her prioritize her own comfort over other people's feelings. Had seen her make unilateral decisions and expect everyone to simply accept them because arguing was too exhausting and she'd outlast any objection through sheer stubborn persistence. But hearing her reduce me to a potential problem, one she'd already neutralized through my physical distance, that cut deeper than I'd expected. Because it meant she'd thought about me, had considered that I might object, and had decided the best approach was to simply exclude me from the process entirely until it was too late for me to do anything about it. She'd underestimated me, had assumed that because I'd moved away, I'd also moved on from caring about this house. That assumption was about to cost her everything. The interruption was quiet but absolute. I didn't raise my voice, didn't storm into the room dramatically. just stepped forward from the hallway where I'd been standing, listening, processing what was happening, and said 5 words that changed everything. I already have the keys. Everyone turned. The potential buyers, a couple maybe in their early 30s. The realtor, a woman in her 50s with the kind of aggressive competence that came from years of closing difficult deals. My mother's attorney, whom I recognized from Dad's funeral 2 years ago. And my mother herself, whose practiced smile vanished the moment she saw me. "Martha," she said, and I could hear her trying to calculate. Trying to figure out how much I'd heard, how much I knew, what I was planning to do. "What are you doing here?" "I live here," I replied calmly. "Not true. I live 6 hours away in a small apartment I'd worked hard to afford." But legally accurate in ways she didn't understand yet. "I still have keys to my house." "Your house?" The realtor looked confused. "Mrs. Caldwell, you said, 'This is my daughter,'" Mom interrupted, standing up with that gracious smile back in place. Damage control mode. "Martha, sweetheart, I've been meaning to call you. This is all happening so fast, but I've found a lovely condo downtown and these wonderful people are interested in purchasing. The house isn't yours to sell," I said. Still calm, still quiet, but absolutely certain. "So I'm afraid this transaction can't proceed." The attorney, who'd been silently observing, spoke up. "Miss Caldwell, the property title is quite clear." "Your mother. Check your title again," I interrupted gently. "All of it, including the amendment filed 3 months before my father died." Silence fell over the room like a blanket. This is the story of how my mom tried to sell my childhood home behind my back, and how I walked in with the keys she didn't expect. I need you to understand what that title means, what it represents. Because this wasn't about real estate or property values or even the sentimental attachment to a house where I'd grown up. It was about being seen, about having your voice heard, about refusing to be dismissed as not a problem by someone who should have valued your opinion above anyone else's. When I say my mom tried to sell my childhood home behind my back, I mean she deliberately excluded me from a decision that affected my inheritance, my history, my connection to my father. She didn't forget to tell me. She chose not to tell me. Calculated that by the time I found out, it would be too late to object. And when I say I walked in with the keys she didn't expect, I don't mean the physical keys in my pocket, though I had those too. I mean the legal documentation that proved this house was never entirely hers to dispose of. The paperwork my father had quietly filed years before his death. The amendment to the property title that my mother either didn't know about or had chosen to ignore. This wasn't revenge. This was protection. Protection my father had built in because he'd known, somehow, that this exact scenario might happen. That my mother might try to erase me from the family legacy the same way she'd spent years erasing my opinions from family decisions. The keys I held weren't just metal. They were proof, and I was about to use them. My name is Martha Elizabeth Caldwell, and I'm 32 years old. This house, the 2-story colonial with the blue shutters and the oak tree in the backyard, has been in my father's family for 3 generations. My grandfather built it in 1962. My father grew up here, met my mother here, brought her home as a bride in 1987. I was born in the master bedroom upstairs in 1992 because my mother went into labor too fast to make it to the hospital. Every room held memories. The kitchen where Dad taught me to make pancakes on Sunday mornings. The living room where we'd watch old movies together while Mom worked late at her office. The backyard where I'd learned to ride a bike, where I'd had birthday parties, where Dad and I had planted a vegetable garden that Mom had complained about but that produced tomatoes every summer. This house was never just my mother's. It was our family's, mine and Dad's as much as hers. But Mom had always acted like it was temporary. Like it was something she tolerated because Dad loved it, but that she'd escape from the moment she could. She'd wanted to move to a modern condo downtown for years. Had complained about the maintenance, the old plumbing, the way the floors creaked and the windows didn't seal properly in winter. Dad had refused. Had loved this house with a fierce loyalty that I'd inherited, but she'd never understood. And when he died 2 years ago, I'd assumed the house would stay in the family. That we'd figure out some arrangement. That she'd at least discuss it with me before making any major decisions. I'd assumed wrong. And this house was about to reveal exactly how wrong I'd been. The house I grew up in had never really felt like it belonged to both my parents equally. Dad had loved every corner of it. The creaky third step on the stairs. The way afternoon light came through the kitchen windows. The oak tree in the backyard that he'd climbed as a child and that I'd climbed years later. Mom had tolerated it. Had decorated it to her taste but never really settled into it the way Dad had. Had always talked about it like it was temporary, like someday they'd move somewhere more suitable, more modern, more aligned with her vision of what their life should look like. I'd noticed that difference even as a child. Noticed how Dad would fix things himself, repairing the porch railing, refinishing the hardwood floors, maintaining the garden. While Mom would hire people for everything, like the house was a burden she was managing rather than a home she was maintaining. She'd grown up differently, in apartments and rental properties, moving frequently for her father's job. She'd never understood Dad's attachment to permanence, to roots, to the specific walls and floors that held family history. It's just a house, she'd say when Dad refused to consider moving. We could have something so much nicer, so much easier to maintain. It's not just a house, Dad would reply quietly. It's our history. It's where Martha's growing up. It's family. They'd had that argument throughout my childhood. Never loudly, never dramatically, just the steady friction of two people who fundamentally disagreed about what mattered. And I'd always known, somewhere deep down, that if Dad were ever gone, Mom would try to leave. To escape the house that represented everything about his values that she'd never shared. What I hadn't known was that Dad had prepared for that possibility. Had built-in protections I wouldn't discover until it was almost too late. My father's silence about the amendment was something I'd only understood after finding the documents. He'd never argued with Mom about the house. Never threatened or demanded or tried to force his will on her. He'd just quietly, methodically, ensured that certain decisions couldn't be made without my involvement. 3 months before he died, before he even knew he was sick, before the heart attack that took him at 58, he'd filed an amendment to the property title, changing it from joint ownership to what the legal documents called joint tenancy with rights of survivorship and mandatory heir consultation. Mandatory heir consultation, which meant that while Mom had the right to live in the house, to maintain it, even to benefit from it financially, she couldn't sell it without my explicit written consent. He'd never told her. I'd found the paperwork a year after his death, going through his filing cabinet looking for old tax documents. Had found a folder labeled Martha Important with a copy of the amendment, a letter from his attorney, and a brief note in Dad's handwriting, just in case. Make sure your mother knows you have rights. Love, Dad. I'd kept the folder, had made my own copies, had consulted with an attorney who'd confirmed that yes, the amendment was legally valid, properly filed, and absolutely binding. But I'd never mentioned it to Mom. Had hoped I'd never need to. Had assumed that even if she wanted to sell, she'd at least discuss it with me first. That assumption had been optimistic. And wrong. Dad had been wiser. Had known she'd try exactly this. Had protected me from it 3 years before it happened. And I'd walked into this house today carrying his protection in my purse. The envelope had been sealed when I'd found it in Dad's filing cabinet. Cream-colored paper, my name written in his careful handwriting across the front. Inside had been the amendment, professionally prepared by his attorney. A letter explaining what he'd done and why. And that brief note that had made me cry when I'd first read it. Martha, I hope you never need this. I hope your mother and I have many more years together, and that when I'm gone, she'll make decisions that honor what we built as a family. But I know her. I know how she thinks. And I know that if I'm not here to argue for keeping this house, she'll sell it the moment it becomes convenient. This amendment ensures she can't do that without your agreement. The house is your inheritance as much as hers. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty about protecting that. You have legal rights here. Use them if you need to. I love you. I'm proud of you. And I trust you to make the right decisions about this house if I can't. Dad. I'd read that note probably 50 times in the year since I'd found it. Had carried it with me when I'd moved to the city. Had pulled it out whenever I'd felt guilty about the distance I'd put between myself and Mom. Because the distance had been necessary. For my sanity. for my independence, for becoming someone other than the daughter who existed to fulfill my mother's expectations. But I'd always felt guilty about it anyway, until I'd found this note and understood that Dad had seen it too. Had understood why I'd needed to leave. Had loved me enough to protect my inheritance even knowing I might not be there to fight for it myself. Well, I was here now, and I was fighting. The first red flag had come 6 weeks ago. A tax notice had arrived at my apartment, forwarded from the house's address, informing me that there were outstanding property taxes on the residence at 247 Maple Street. I'd been confused. Mom handled the house expenses. She lived there. Why would a tax notice be sent to me? I'd called the county assessor's office. Had been told that according to their records, I was listed as a co-owner on the property title and therefore entitled to receive notices about tax obligations. I think there's been an error, I'd said. My mother owns that house. I'm just. According to the 2019 amendment filed with our office, you're listed as a mandatory consulted heir with ownership interest in the property, the clerk had explained. That makes you legally responsible for taxes even if you don't reside there. 2019, 3 months before Dad died. The year I'd been busy finishing my master's degree. The year I'd barely come home except for holidays. The year Dad had apparently decided to protect my future without telling me. That tax notice had prompted me to dig out the envelope I'd found in his filing cabinet. To reread the documents I'd only skimmed before. To actually understand what Dad had done. And to start quietly researching property law, just in case. Just in case Mom tried something like this. I'd hoped I was being paranoid. That the tax notice was just a bureaucratic quirk. That Mom would never actually try to sell without discussing it with me. Then Mrs. Patterson had called about the for sale sign. And I'd known. That had been right. And I'd been prepared. The quiet research had consumed my evenings for 2 weeks after that tax notice. I'd found a property lawyer who specialized in family disputes. Had paid for a consultation. Had shown her the amendment, the title history, the documentation from the county. This is ironclad, she'd told me. Your mother can't sell without your written consent. If she tries, the sale won't be legally valid. You could challenge it and win. But she doesn't know that, I'd said. Does she know about the amendment? I don't know. My father never mentioned discussing it with her, and she's never brought it up to me. Then there are 2 possibilities, the lawyer had explained. Either she knows and is hoping you won't assert your rights, or she doesn't know and is about to get a very unpleasant surprise. I'd decided not to warn her, not because I wanted to hurt her or embarrass her, but because warning her would have just prompted her to handle it differently, to pressure me, to guilt me, to use the emotional manipulation she perfected over 32 years to make me feel selfish for protecting my inheritance. If I told her, she'd have found a way to make this my fault, to frame my legal rights as me being difficult or ungrateful or disrespectful. So I'd stayed quiet, had monitored the county records online to see if she filed any sale documents, had kept in touch with Mrs. Patterson who'd promised to let me know if anything changed at the house, and I'd waited. Prepared, ready to drive home the moment I needed to. That moment had come today, and I'd been ready. The amendment itself was remarkable in its simplicity. 1 page of legal language that changed everything. Title to the property located at 247 Maple Street shall remain in joint tenancy between the current owners, with the following modification. Upon the death of either owner, the surviving owner shall maintain property rights subject to mandatory consultation with designated heirs. No sale, transfer, or encumbrance of said property shall be valid without written consent of all parties holding ownership interest, including designated heirs. Designated heir, Martha Elizabeth Caldwell, daughter of current owners. That was it. No elaborate legal maneuvering. No complex trust structures. Just a clear statement that I had to agree to any sale. Dad's attorney had filed it properly with the county, had ensured all the paperwork was in order, had created a paper trail that would survive any challenge. And Mom either had never checked the title after Dad died, or had checked it and decided to proceed anyway, hoping I wouldn't know. Either way, she'd miscalculated, because I was standing in this living room holding copies of every relevant document. And the look on her attorney's face suggested he was beginning to understand exactly how badly this could go. I hadn't warned her because I'd known exactly what would have happened if I had. She'd have called me immediately. Would have been hurt that I'd gone behind her back to research the property title. Would have made it about my lack of trust instead of her lack of transparency. Why didn't you just ask me about it? She'd have said, making my reasonable precaution sound like paranoia. Then she'd have launched into the guilt. After everything your father and I did for you. After we supported you through college. After we encouraged you to follow your dreams, even when it meant you moved away. This is how you repay us? By questioning my right to make decisions about my own home. My own home. Not our family home. Not the house Dad loved. My home. Her home. The home she tolerated for decades and now wanted to escape. She'd have reframed my legal rights as an attack on her autonomy. Would have made me the villain for wanting to preserve something Dad had valued. Would have exhausted me with circular arguments until I'd either given in or damaged our relationship so badly that neither of us could recover. So I'd said nothing. Had let her proceed with whatever plans she was making. Had trusted that Dad's amendment would protect my interests even if I couldn't protect them through conversation. And I'd been right to trust that. Because here we were. The sale she'd arranged crumbling in front of professional witnesses. The truth emerging not through my accusations but through legal documentation she couldn't argue with. This was better than warning her. This was protection working exactly as it was designed to. The buyer's confidence had been absolute right up until I'd mentioned the amendment. The husband, I'd heard them introduce themselves as Brian and Sophie, had been measuring windows with his phone, already planning furniture placement. Sophie had been photographing the kitchen, probably sending pictures to her mother or friends, excited about this new chapter in their lives. They'd been so certain this was happening. Had probably already given notice at their current rental. Had maybe started packing. Had definitely imagined their future in these rooms without any idea they were standing in the middle of a family situation that was about to unravel. I almost felt bad for them. They were innocent here. Victims of my mother's incomplete disclosure and their realtor's inadequate due diligence. But I couldn't let sympathy for them override protecting my rights. I don't understand, Brian said now, looking between me and my mother. The listing said this was a clean sale. No complications. It is a clean sale, my mother said firmly. Martha, stop being dramatic. You're embarrassing me in front of these nice people. I'm not being dramatic, I replied quietly. I'm stating legal facts. The property title includes an amendment that requires my consent for any sale. I haven't given that consent. Therefore, this transaction can't proceed. Your consent? Sophie looked confused. But you're the daughter, right? Don't the parents own? It's complicated, the realtor interrupted, her professional composure starting to crack. Mrs. Caldwell, you assured me there were no title complications. You said you had full authority to sell. I do have full authority, Mom insisted. This is just a misunderstanding. Martha is upset that I didn't consult her, but legally, the attorney interrupted quietly. If there's an amendment to the title requiring our consent, that changes everything. He was already pulling out his phone, probably to call his office, to verify what I'd just said, to determine how badly he'd missed this in his review. The realtor's question came with barely concealed frustration. Are you family? Because if this is a family dispute, we need to pause the entire process until it's resolved. I'm her daughter, I confirmed. And yes, this is a family matter, but it's also a legal matter. The property can't be sold without my written consent. Do you have documentation of this alleged amendment? She asked. Alleged. Like I was making it up. Like I'd fabricated legal documents to disrupt my mother's plans. I pulled the folder from my purse. Inside were copies of everything. The original amendment filed in 2019. The updated title showing my name as a designated heir with mandatory consultation rights. The letter from Dad's attorney confirming the amendment was properly filed and legally binding. And the note from Dad, though I wasn't planning to share that. Here, I said, handing the folder to the attorney. Everything's documented with the county. You can verify it with a quick call. He took the folder, started reading. His expression changed as he processed what he was seeing. From confident to concerned to professionally neutral. These appear to be legitimate, he said carefully. I'll need to verify with the county, but if this amendment was properly filed, it was, I confirmed. Filed April 15th, 2019. 3 months before my father passed away. Why didn't you mention this earlier? The realtor demanded, looking at my mother. Before we went through all this effort? Before these buyers made an offer? I didn't know, my mother said. But her voice lacked conviction. And I could see the realtor didn't believe her. Could see everyone in the room recalculating. Wondering what else she might have failed to disclose. Wondering if this sale had ever been legitimate. The buyers were exchanging glances. Already backing away mentally. Already recognizing this wasn't worth the complication. I produced the keys then. Not dramatically. Just pulled them from my pocket and set them on the coffee table. The house key. The front door deadbolt. The back door. The garage. All still on the keyring Dad had given me when I'd turned 16, with the little compass charm he'd attached so I could always find my way home. These aren't symbolic, I said quietly. They're legal access to property I have ownership interest in. The amendment doesn't just require my consent for sale. It establishes me as a co-owner with rights to access and consultation. The attorney was reading more carefully now, flipping through pages, cross-referencing documents. This is actually quite comprehensive, he said. The language is clear. Any transfer of the property requires written consent from all parties with ownership interest, which includes me, I finished. Which includes me. But she doesn't live here, my mother protested. She moved away. She has her own life. She can't just, I can, I interrupted gently, because Dad made sure I could. He filed this amendment knowing that someday you might try exactly this, and he built in protections to ensure you couldn't erase me from our family legacy. Family legacy. Mom's voice rose. This is a house, Martha. Just a house. Your father was too sentimental about it, and apparently has made you the same way. But it's just walls and floors and old memories that don't pay the maintenance bills or the property taxes or that I've been receiving notices about. I cut in. Because the county recognizes me as a co-owner. Because legally, I'm responsible for this property even though I don't live here. Because Dad made sure I'd stay connected to it even after he was gone. The room had gone very quiet. Everyone processing. Understanding finally that this wasn't a simple sale and possibly never had been. The lawyer reread the amendment 3 times. I watched his expression shift from professional skepticism to reluctant acceptance to careful calculation. This wasn't the first family property dispute he'd handled, but it was probably the first where he'd missed something this significant in his initial title review. The amendment appears to be properly executed and filed, he said finally, his voice carefully neutral, which means any sale would indeed require Miss Caldwell's written consent. So get her consent, my mother snapped. Martha, stop being ridiculous. Sign whatever needs signing so these people can buy their house. It's not their house yet, I replied, and I'm not signing anything. Why not? Sophie asked, and she actually sounded curious rather than angry. If you don't live here, if you've moved away, why do you care if your mom sells? It was a fake question, one I'd been asking myself for weeks. Because my father loved this house, I said. Because it's been in our family for 60 years. Because selling it erases that history. And because I wasn't consulted. If my mother had come to me and said, I'm thinking of selling, what do you think? We could have had a conversation. But she didn't. She made this decision without me and expected me to just accept it because I live out of state. I didn't think you'd care, Mom said, but it sounded weak even to her. You never visit. You barely call. You built a whole life away from here. Why would I think you'd object to me selling a house you don't want? You didn't think I'd find out, I corrected. That's different from thinking I wouldn't care. Silence stretched too long, and in that silence, everyone in the room understood that this had never been about whether I'd care. It had been about whether I'd know in time to stop it. The first crack in the sales foundation came from the attorney's mouth, spoken with the careful precision of someone delivering bad news he knew would be received poorly. Based on this documentation, Mrs. Caldwell, you don't have sole authority to sell this property. That's ridiculous, my mother said. I've lived here for 35 years. My name is on the title. My husband is dead. Of course I have authority. You have ownership rights, the attorney clarified. But the amendment creates a shared authority structure. Think of it like a partnership. You can't dissolve a partnership without all partners agreeing. She's not my partner. She's my daughter. She's a co-owner with mandatory consultation rights, he corrected. Which means legally, she has equal say in whether this property is sold. This is absurd, the realtor interjected. Mrs. Caldwell came to me with a clear directive to sell. We vetted the title. We found a buyer. This is a legitimate transaction. It would be, the attorney agreed, if all parties with ownership interests had consented. But they haven't. He looked at me. I assume you're not willing to provide that consent. Not without significant discussion about alternatives, I said carefully. And not under these circumstances where I was deliberately excluded from the process. Deliberately excluded, my mother repeated. You're never here. You made it clear you couldn't be bothered with family obligations. How was I supposed to consult with someone who's made themselves unavailable? I'm available now, I pointed out. In fact, I drove 6 hours to be here when I found out what you were trying to do. So perhaps the issue isn't my availability. It's your willingness to include me in decisions that affect my inheritance. Inheritance. She laughed. You think this is about inheritance? You're 32 years old with a good job and your own life. You don't need this house. That's not for you to decide, I replied quietly. My mother's denial came wrapped in laughter, but the sound was too sharp, too quick to be genuine. This is absurd. My husband filed some paperwork without telling me, and now my daughter thinks she owns my house. Not your house, I corrected. Our house. The house Dad made sure would require both our agreement to sell. Your father was being paranoid, she said. He always worried too much about things that didn't matter. Clearly it mattered to him, I replied. Enough to hire an attorney and file legal documents. Enough to write me a letter explaining why. Enough to make sure that even after he was gone, his wishes would be protected. His wishes. Her voice had gone cold now. What about my wishes? I've lived in this house for decades. I've maintained it. I've paid the bills. I've dealt with the broken pipes and the roof leaks and all the things your father loved but never wanted to actually fix properly. And now you who left, who couldn't wait to get away, who built a whole life somewhere else, you're going to tell me I can't sell. I'm telling you that you can't sell without discussing it with me first, I said. That's all the amendment requires. Discussion, consultation, agreement, not your unilateral decision. I'm your mother, she said, like that ended the argument. You're supposed to respect my judgment. And I'm your daughter, I replied. You're supposed to respect that I have legal rights here. The buyers had started gathering their things, quietly, trying not to draw attention to themselves. But the message was clear. They were leaving. This was too complicated, too messy, too much family drama for a simple house purchase. The realtor noticed. Wait, we can resolve this. If Miss Caldwell would just be reasonable, I'm being completely reasonable, I said. I'm exercising legal rights my father specifically ensured I'd have. That's not unreasonable. That's just inconvenient for people who didn't expect me to know about them. The paperwork changed sides in that moment. Physically, the attorney had been holding the purchase agreement, the documents that would have transferred the house to Brian and Sophie. Now he set them down and picked up my folder instead. The one with the amendment, the title history, the proof that this transaction couldn't proceed without my consent. I need to verify all of this with the county, he said. But assuming these documents are legitimate, and they appear to be, we can't close this sale without Ms. Caldwell's written approval. How long will verification take? The realtor asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer and didn't like it. Given that it's Friday afternoon, probably Monday at the earliest. And if the documents are verified, then we'll need to halt the sale until all parties with ownership interest agree to the terms. He looked at my mother. I should have caught this in the initial title review. I apologize for the oversight. It's not your fault, my mother said, though her voice was tight. You were working with the information I provided. Which apparently wasn't complete, he replied. Professional. Diplomatic. But the implication was clear. She'd either known about the amendment and failed to disclose it, or she'd been negligent in reviewing her own property title. Either way, the fault was partly hers. What are our options? Brian asked. He and Sophie had stopped gathering their things, but they both looked ready to bolt. You can wait while we resolve the ownership dispute, the attorney said. Or you can withdraw your offer and look for another property. How long would resolving the dispute take? That depends on whether the parties can reach an agreement, the attorney replied carefully. If not, it could go to court, which could take months. We can't wait months, Sophie said. Our lease ends next month. Then I'd recommend withdrawing the offer, the attorney said. I'm sorry. This isn't the outcome anyone wanted. Except me, I thought. This was exactly the outcome I'd come here to ensure. The sale collapsed in slow motion. The buyers made eye contact with each other, had one of those silent married conversations, and stood up together. We're sorry, Brian said, addressing my mother. But this is too complicated for us. We need something simpler. I understand, my mother said stiffly. They left quickly after that. The realtor followed them out, probably trying to salvage something, maybe trying to convince them to wait a few days while things got sorted out. But I could hear the finality in their goodbyes. They were done. The attorney started gathering his documents. Mrs. Caldwell, I'll need to review everything more carefully and get back to you with a full analysis. But I want to be clear that if this amendment is valid, and it appears to be, you cannot sell this property without your daughter's consent. I understand, my mother said. What are my options? Negotiate with your daughter. Come to an agreement about the property's future. Or challenge the amendment in court, though I should warn you that would be expensive and unlikely to succeed if it was properly filed. How much would it cost to challenge? Tens of thousands, possibly more. And that's assuming you have grounds, which from what I can see, you don't. He gathered the last of his papers. I'm sorry this didn't go as planned. I'll be in touch Monday after I verify the documents. Then he was gone too. And it was just me and my mother in the living room of the house we apparently co-owned. The house she tried to sell without telling me. The house Dad had protected with paperwork and foresight I was only now fully appreciating. Well, she said finally, I hope you're satisfied. I'm not trying to hurt you, I said. I'm just protecting what Dad wanted protected. What your father wanted, she corrected. Not what I want. Not what makes sense. Just what he wanted. Yes, I agreed. Exactly that. The room cleared gradually after that. My mother stood up, smoothed her dress, and walked toward the kitchen without another word to me. I heard the kettle being filled. Her stress response habit. Make tea. Find control in small routines when larger things were falling apart. I stayed in the living room, looked around at the familiar space, the furniture I'd grown up with, the photos on the mantel, my school pictures, my college graduation, my parents' wedding photo from 1987. The house that had always been here, solid and permanent, while everything else in my life changed. It was just me and the truth now. The truth that my mother had tried to sell this house without my knowledge. The truth that my father had anticipated exactly this scenario and built in protections. The truth that our family had never really agreed on what this house meant. To Dad it was legacy, to Mom it was maintenance, to me it was what? What did it mean to me? I'd left, had built a life 6 hours away, had visited rarely, had let Mom's complaints about the house wash over me because I'd been too busy building my own life to worry about preserving Dad's. But standing here now, I realized it mattered more than I'd acknowledged. Not the physical structure, not the property value, but what it represented. The fact that Dad had loved something enough to protect it. The fact that he'd trusted me to honor that protection. The fact that some things were worth preserving even when they were inconvenient. Even when they required sacrifice. Mom came back with her tea. Sat down on the couch. Didn't look at me. What now? She asked finally. The ownership confirmation sat in the folder the attorney had left behind. A copy of the title showing both our names, Margaret Caldwell and Martha Elizabeth Caldwell. Joint ownership with mandatory consultation requirements. Legal, binding, unchanged by her attempted sale. The house is legally mine as much as it's yours, I said. Not gloating, just stating fact. I know, she replied. What are you going to do with that information? It was a fake question. I could force her to stay. Could refuse to consent to any sale ever. Could make her spend the rest of her life in a house she'd never really wanted. Or I could negotiate. Could find a compromise that honored both Dad's wishes and her needs. Could be the bigger person even though she tried to exclude me entirely. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I know what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to let you sell it to strangers without any discussion. I'm not going to let Dad's legacy be erased because you find the house inconvenient. It's more than inconvenient, she said. It's expensive. It's deteriorating. It needs work I can't afford and don't want to manage. Then we figure out alternatives, I said. Maybe I buy you out. Maybe we rent it. Maybe we set up a trust that preserves it for the family. But we do it together. As co-owners. As family. Not you making unilateral decisions and hoping I won't find out. You were never supposed to find out about the amendment, she said. That's the truth, isn't it? I didn't answer. Didn't need to. We both knew. Your father was always protecting you from me, she continued. Always worried I'd be too hard on you, too controlling, too much like this. I finished. Yes. She sipped her tea. He wasn't wrong. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd probably get. And maybe it was enough. For now, I left without a victory speech. Without gloating or explaining or making the moment bigger than it needed to be. I'd said what needed saying. Had established my legal rights. Had stopped the sale. Anything more would have been excess. I'm going back to the city, I told my mother. But we're going to talk about this. Really talk. Not you making decisions and informing me after. Actual discussion about what happens to this house. When? She asked. Next weekend. I'll drive back. We can sit down with all the information, what it's worth, what maintaining it costs, what our options are. And we'll figure it out together. What if we can't agree? Then we live with joint ownership and figure out how to make that work, I said. Because that's what the law requires now. Dad made sure of it. She nodded slowly. Didn't argue. Maybe because she was too tired. Maybe because she recognized she'd lost this round. Maybe because some part of her understood that Dad had been right to protect this house from her impulse to simply escape it. I picked up my folder, my keys, walked to the front door. Martha, she called as I was leaving. I turned. I'm not sorry I tried to sell, she said. But I am sorry I didn't tell you. It wasn't much, but it was something. I'll see you next weekend, I said. And I walked out, got in my car. Drove away from the house that was mine as much as it was hers. The house Dad had protected. The house I'd protected today. Not with anger. Not with drama. Just with proof. The keys in my pocket. The documents in my folder. The knowledge that some things were worth fighting for even when the fight was uncomfortable. Even when it meant confronting family. Even when it would have been easier to just let it go. The morning after, I woke up in my apartment feeling lighter than I had in weeks. I'd stopped the sale, had protected Dad's legacy, had claimed the space I'd been entitled to all along but had been too distant, too busy, too conflict-averse to assert. Some things weren't reclaimed with anger. They were reclaimed with proof, with documentation, with the quiet assertion of legal rights that couldn't be dismissed or argued away, with the willingness to show up when it mattered and say no. This isn't right. This isn't how we do this. I didn't know what would happen with the house long term. Maybe Mom and I would find a compromise. Maybe I'd eventually buy her out and keep it in the family. Maybe we'd sell it together someday, when we'd both agreed it was time. But it would be our decision. Together. Not her unilateral choice. Not her erasing me from the equation because I lived out of state. Not her assuming my distance meant I didn't care. Dad had known this might happen. Had prepared for it. Had loved me enough to build in protections I wouldn't discover until I needed them. Had trusted that when the moment came, I'd stand up for what he'd valued. I'd honored that trust. Had walked into that house with the keys he'd made sure I'd have. The keys that weren't just metal and plastic. The keys that were proof and protection and love that survived death. My phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Patterson, saw the for sale sign come down. Everything okay? I smiled. Typed back, everything's fine. Thank you for calling me. Because it was fine. Not perfect. Not resolved. But protected. Some legacies were worth fighting for. And some fights were won not with volume, but with proof. I had the proof. I had the keys. And I'd made sure both mattered when they needed to most.